Today, in the 21st century, we are greatly benefited by a multitude of things that had roots a century ago in the era of World War I. Innovations, institutions, but especially people who put their lives on the line to preserve freedoms we have now.
My own father actually fought in World War I.
My grandfather served in World War I.
An ancestor of mine named Charles Flake.
My grandfather served in the 91st Division.
Joseph F. Smith had 6 sons that he sent off to war in World War I.
In my own family, my grandfather was one of the soldiers.
He chose my grandfather, Calvin, to be one of 3 chaplains.
When things got tough, you kind of thought about Grandpa Humphrey. He was in World War I.
I would hope that my grandchildren would not see themselves as part of this fast-paced, disposable generation that experiences come and go. But our experiences are here to mean something. We are sent to earth by our Father in heaven to have a strong mortal experience. And we learn from the experiences of others. We commemorate the 100th anniversary of the end of World War I at the 11th hour on the 11th day of the 11th month in the year 1918.
But if there's ever a war that should not have occurred, it was World War I. It is an absolute failure of politics, diplomacy, and statesmanship. What's interesting in the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand and his wife Sophia is the weapon used was a Browning semi-automatic pistol. So John Moses Browning from Ogden, Utah, designed this weapon, or the type of weapon used in the assassination.
When the war started, the game of alliances brought the different nations to war. On one side, of course, you had the Triple Alliance with Germany, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and also Italy. And then the Triple Entente, as we call it in French, which meant France, the British Empire, and also Russia. This war started with the soldiers thinking that it would not last very long. They left, as we say, with the fleur au fusil, the flower on their rifles, thinking that they would be back after a few weeks only.
It's a long way to Tipperary, it's a long way to go.
It was a celebratory atmosphere when they departed. They assured their parents and others, well, they'd be home in time for Christmas of 1914, that the war would soon be over. Well, of course, that was not to happen. And the war began to be this protracted, long, paralyzing conflict fought in the trenches.
The sinking of the Lusitania in 1915, the sinking of the Sussex in 1916, the Zimmermann Telegram in January 1917, and Germany's declaration in January regarding unrestricted warfare on the open seas, which was followed shortly by the sinking of the Laconia and 3 American steamships. American neutrality ended on April 6, 1917, when the United States declared war on Germany.
Hear them calling you and me, every son of liberty. Hurry right away, no delay, go today. Make your daddy glad to have had such a lad. Tell your sweetheart not to pine, to be proud her boy's in line. Over there, send the word over there, that the Yanks are coming, the drums rum-tumming everywhere. So prepare, say a prayer, send the word to beware. We'll be over, we're coming over, and we won't come back till it's over there.
About 2.2 million American soldiers arrived or were in France and were in the fight. But it was a huge logistical thing too, where we had to take our own locomotives and we had to build our own railroads in France for supplies and services, because the French gauge tracks were different than our U.S. locomotives. So we had to lay hundreds of miles of rail there in France to supply the effort.
What made it unique for Calvin is he had served a mission in Germany and had learned to love the people, which created quite an interesting dynamic to be going over there and fighting them.
His German came in handy throughout the war. As prisoners would be captured on the front, he would see these young, scared German kids, and he would go up and be able to speak with them in fluent, colloquial German and put their minds at ease and let them know that everything was going to be okay and that for them the war was over.
My father, who actually fought on the very ground that we're now walking, described some of the desperate situations in which the Marines found themselves. Because the ground was rocky, the Marines, when they arrived and began to dig in on June the 2nd, 1918, were not able to dig trenches, and so the best that they could do before the Germans attacked was to scoop out areas of dirt so that they could fight from the prone position. Just a few days later, the world, so to speak, fell in on top of the Marines, and they were engaged in a desperate battle.
On the 26th of September 1918, Chaplain Calvin Smith had a very unusual experience. He was invited to go as part of an intelligence reconnaissance up toward German lines. They snuck up across behind the initial German lines, and as they crept within earshot of the Germans, they came under fire from German snipers.
So he got down into a prone position facing the sniper and then got his helmet in the way.
And he said bullets were whizzing over his head the entire time. Crawled back very slowly back to the American lines.
And he went to eat his dinner.
He took a can of beef out of his knapsack.
Opened a can of bully beef, which is corned beef hash.
Poured the contents into his mess kit, heated it up, started eating.
And bit down on a bullet. The sniper had shot through his backpack and it lodged into a can of corned beef.
And he said, I almost broke my teeth.
So a can of corned beef saved Calvin Smith's life. Now, oddly enough, the rest of his life he loved corned beef, hash, and potatoes for breakfast. He developed a love of that because of the war that just never died. He became very fond of corned beef.
The sisters participate in many efforts combined with the Red Cross and other organizations throughout the world, but they also did things on the home front.
Keep the home fires burning while your hearts are yearning.
I am amazed by how many of the nurses in Utah volunteered to serve in the war. We had Latter-day Saint sisters who organized knitting groups. These things happened all over the world. The United States bought 200,000 bushels of wheat from the Relief Society. Their sacrifice and savings helped preserve many lives.
Arms! Present! Arms!
We are here today in the En Marne Cemetery, about 50 miles east of Paris, France. And this cemetery contains the remains of 2,289 American soldiers who made the ultimate sacrifice for the cause of freedom and liberty and to prevent a dictatorship from assuming control of Europe. And this hallowed ground is sacred. It is made sacred by the sacrifices and the blood of those who fought to redeem the land. We're talking about individuals who had hopes and dreams, most of whom were fairly young, who had most of their living years ahead of them, whose lives were taken at this battle. When we do not look afar backwards in time and harden our hearts to the sacrifices and the activities of those who went before us, we're not honoring, as we should, those who gave their last full measure of devotion so that we could have our tomorrows. There are a number of life's lessons that come directly from remembering what it is that our fathers, our forefathers have done for us. We look back, we gain a perspective, an eternal perspective that can't be gained unless we come to appreciate what happened here 100 years ago during the First World War.